In every man's life, there are seasons where external pressure becomes internal necessity. A shift occurs, not dramatic, not violent, but a slow, deliberate recalibration of the psyche. Some men collapse under these seasons, surrendering their agency. Others seek validation, company, or emotional reassurance to stabilize themselves. But a rare subset withdraws into a state of deliberate internal consolidation. These men are often referred to as Sigma males, not as a slogan, not as a social performance, but as a behavioral pattern rooted in autonomy, selective engagement, and psychological independence. For the Sigma male, survival mode is not panic. It is structure. It is a system. It is the quiet elimination of distractions and the removal of emotional liabilities. While others fight to be seen, the Sigma disengages from social comparison, because comparison has no functional value in environments where resources, emotional, financial, psychological, are limited. When a Sigma male enters extreme survival mode, he is not chasing dominance or applause. There is no rally for external recognition. Instead, he contracts inward and simplifies. He begins to assess patterns rather than personalities, and constraints rather than complaints. He respects energy the way an investor respects capital, deploying it slowly with caution and with measurable outcomes that strengthen rather than scatter. Survival, to him, means precision of effort. It means limiting emotional leakage. It means refusing unnecessary involvement in group anxiety. Research in cognitive behavioral psychology shows that under prolonged stress, humans often increase social dependency as a coping mechanism. But the Sigma does the opposite. He lowers exposure, knowing that unfiltered environments dilute discipline. This withdrawal is not collapse. It is alignment, reduced talking, reduced speculation, reduced reactivity, increased observation, increased pattern recognition, increased resilience. It is during these periods that his internal hierarchy reorganizes. Sleep becomes scheduled. Food becomes fuel. Time becomes non-negotiable. Communication becomes selective. The brain transitions into metacognition, thinking about thinking. He sharpens tools rather than collecting opinions. There's no aggression in this phase, no emotional volatility. Instead, he becomes economical with movement, language, strategy, and relationships. Psychology calls this adaptive optimization, the ability to re-engineer routines in response to stress without external dependency. Many misunderstand this state as coldness or emotional withdrawal. In truth, it is a refusal to leak energy into environments that cannot sustain growth. The Sigma male is not hiding. He is conserving. He is not isolating. He is restructuring. And in that restructuring, a new version of discipline emerges. Quiet, precise, undistracted. This is what happens when the Sigma male enters extreme survival mode. Point 1, reduction of social noise and cognitive bandwidth preservation. When a Sigma male transitions into survival mode, the first observable behavioral adjustment is not loud, emotional, or external. It is internal, subtle, and deeply cognitive. The Sigma begins to reduce his exposure to what psychologists call ambient social noise, the background interference of other people's opinions, emotions, pressures, and anxieties. Most men, when placed under stress, instinctively increase their social interactions. They look for reassurance. They seek an audience. They distribute their emotional burdens across groups in an attempt to regulate distress. But the Sigma does the opposite, not as rebellion, but as efficiency. The male brain is sensitive to cognitive overload, and attention is a finite resource. When the sigma senses instability, financial, emotional, or environmental, he restricts access to that resource with a level of precision that resembles an engineer rationing voltage during a blackout. He does not respond to messages as quickly. He communicates in shorter, functional segments. Conversations become less narrative and more transactional. He avoids group dynamics because group dynamics require emotional maintenance, and emotional maintenance drains cognitive performance. In neuropsychology, this is referred to as load management, the reduction of external stimuli to preserve working memory for critical problem solving. Working memory can only hold a handful of variables at any given moment. And when social noise occupies that limited storage, strategic thinking collapses. The sigma is not avoiding people because he dislikes them. He is avoiding cognitive interference. He preserves bandwidth the way a strategist preserves ammunition. Each bullet must have a target. Each unit of attention must have purpose. Each communication must support measurable outcomes. There is no reward for emotional leakage. The sigma allows silence to reclaim space in his life. Silence becomes a filtration system. It screens out impulsive behavior. It screens out reactive gestures. It screens out unnecessary explanations. It stabilizes the limbic system, reducing cortisol spikes and minimizing the amygdala-driven urgency that pushes most men into irrational choices. He is not trying to be superior. He is simply eliminating inefficiency. This internal quieting recalibrates the autonomic nervous system. Heart rate variability improves. Executive function strengthens. His mind transitions from emotional thinking to analytical structuring. This is the genuine entry stage of survival mode, attention consolidation. While others debate, he observes. While others vent, he records. While others panic, he assesses variables. In evolutionary anthropology, silence was a survival mechanism. Speech attracted threat. Observation ensured longevity. The sigma channels that ancient instinct. He becomes a recorder of patterns rather than a participant in performance. This is not antisocial behavior. It is regulatory behavior. He is not running from society. He is rationing mental fuel for the next stage. Point 2, transformation of stress into systems rather than stories. Once bandwidth is preserved, the sigma does something uncommon among overstressed men. He engineers systems. The average man interprets stress narratively. He tells stories about unfair circumstances, lost opportunities, or perceived injustice. He externalizes responsibility in emotional language. This narrative loop does not resolve anything. It merely rehearses anxiety. The sigma bypasses narrative reinforcement. He converts stress into structure. He forms rules, processes, and measurable checkpoints. He becomes objective with himself. He documents expenditures. He measures hours. He audits relationships. He inventories emotional commitments. He quantifies habits. His life begins to resemble a laboratory rather than a theater. The sigma understands a simple masculine law. When circumstances tighten, improvisation fails. Systems survive. Thus, he simplifies scheduling. He pre-plans meals. He structures training. He reduces novelty because novelty drains glucose, the brain's energy substrate. Cognitive science shows that novelty seeking increases dopamine variability, weakening discipline. The sigma instead stabilizes dopamine through routine, which amplifies consistency. Behavioral economists describe this as resource automation using predefined rules to eliminate decision fatigue. Studies on elite performers confirm that they remove trivial decisions to preserve cognitive stamina. The Sigma does this instinctively. He is not seeking applause for discipline. He is protecting neurological function. His behavioral psychology transitions from open-loop chaos to closed-loop execution. He moves from reactive behavior to procedural behavior. Each action becomes deliberate, measured, and replicable. Where others dramatize problems, he mechanizes solutions. Where others tell emotional stories, he designs behavioral algorithms. The Sigma's emotional system becomes a command center. He reduces unnecessary questions. He eliminates vague intentions. He calibrates objectives into sequential operations. He's not concerned about how he feels. Feelings are weather. He's concerned about what must be done, when it must be done, and how consistently he can repeat execution. This is not emotional suppression. It is emotional sequencing, an orderly deployment of functionality. His internal dialogue shifts. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" he asks, "What parameter must be adjusted?" Instead of, "This is stressful," he asks, "What protocol neutralizes the variable?" In survival mode, he no longer negotiates with procrastination. He assigns tasks and executes. He no longer negotiates with distraction. He blocks inputs and focuses. He becomes his own governing body. There is no external committee, no motivational spectacle, no accountability partner. He treats stress like data. He treats uncertainty like a planning problem. This is the architecture of composure. Point 3, a complete withdrawal from external validation. Loops. As survival mode deepens, the Sigma eliminates one of the most entrenched psychological dependencies of modern masculinity: validation seeking. Human beings are wired to regulate self-worth through external reflection. Status, acknowledgement, peer approval, and visible progress. Under stress, this instinct intensifies. Men begin broadcasting their struggles for empathy reinforcement because social recognition temporarily soothes anxiety. But external validation is a fragile regulation system. It depends on unpredictable emotional responses from other people. The Sigma abandons that dependency. He stops broadcasting progress. He stops narrating difficulty. He stops seeking commentary on his direction. His goals become private contracts rather than public performances. He understands a principle that evolutionary psychology confirms. Status signaling consumes energy, but produces no survival advantage in resource-scarce environments. If recognition does not produce resources, it loses value. If attention does not produce stability, it becomes interference. The Sigma replaces validation with metrics. He measures outcome rather than applause. He evaluates performance rather than impressions. External interpretation collapses into irrelevance. He no longer needs to be understood. Not because he is defiant, but because understanding does not solve problems. He no longer needs encouragement, not because he is immune to hardship, but because encouragement is inconsistent fuel. Validation from others becomes a liability because it conditions action on external reward. The Sigma male's emotional economy becomes internalized. Confidence shifts from social reinforcement to measurable execution. He builds identity on self-governed standards. This is where misinterpretations arise. People assume emotional coldness. They assume arrogance. They assume superiority. They assume bitterness. What they are witnessing is simply self-regulated esteem. the ability to maintain self-worth independent of external feedback loops. In self-determination theory, this is autonomous motivation, action governed by personal values rather than approval. In sociological terms, it is non-positional status, identity rooted in sovereignty rather than hierarchy. The sigma does not compete for hierarchy placement. Hierarchy loses meaning when survival is internally engineered. He is not trying to be alpha. He is not trying to be admired. His self-worth is not a commodity for negotiation. It is a silent oath, a private ledger of execution. His social presence becomes minimal, not because he is weak, but because he refuses to trade focus for visibility. Point 4, the replacement of emotion-based motivation with skill-based resilience. Most men operate on emotion. Motivation rises and falls with their mood, direction depends on approval, and momentum requires stimulation. Emotion burns fast, and when pressure tightens, that fuel collapses because the emotional engine was never designed for endurance. The sigma evolves out of this emotional dependency. He transitions from feeling-based behavior to skill-based consistency, because skill compounds while emotion fluctuates. Skill creates reliability. Emotion introduces volatility. Where most men ask, do I feel like working? Do I feel confident? The sigma removes permission from the equation. He acts because action is required. Decision becomes an instrument, not an emotional gamble. He builds competencies that increase autonomy, strength, financial literacy, negotiation capacity, emotional regulation, and conflict navigation. Each skill reduces dependency and expands leverage. He becomes less reactive, less persuadable, and harder to destabilize. Where others vent, he solves. Where others complain, he restructures. He does not reject emotion. He subordinates it to strategy. Emotion becomes a diagnostic signal, not a command. His lifestyle shifts from high dopamine thrills to low dopamine stability. Entertainment and consumption diminish while productivity and patience increase. Delays are tolerated, impulses are moderated. He builds internal infrastructure, habits, systems, and feedback loops that absorb chaos. Routines maintain continuity. He doesn't chase adrenaline, he pursues repetition and refinement. That is masculine resilience, execution independent of mood. In chaos, he doesn't accelerate, he steadies, simplifies, and executes. Point 5, the protection of psychological territory and boundary enforcement. As survival pressure intensifies, the sigma male's boundaries sharpen. He restricts emotional access. He becomes meticulous about who occupies his cognitive territory. He is careful with who receives information. He stops explaining himself. He stops narrating intentions. He stops emotional outsourcing. In psychological terms, this is territorial sovereignty over one's mental ecosystem. The sigma treats his mind as prime real estate. Access requires justification. Proximity requires utility. Conversation requires alignment. He does not provide emotional hospitality to people who drain stability. He does not allow argumentative personalities to influence cognition. He does not participate in emotional labor that produces no long-term outcome. Boundary enforcement is not hostility. It is clarity. It is resource preservation. The sigma understands that the mind is a strategic landscape. Every intrusion has cost. Every demand has price. Every interruption has consequence. Boundaries are not punishments. They are conservation mechanisms. In ecology, species under resource constraints restrict exposure to predators and competitors. The sigma mirrors this. He restricts social predators, people who drain energy. He restricts emotional competitors, people who weaponize insecurity. He restricts emotional inconsistency, people who invite chaos. He restricts attention thieves, the endless scroll of media designed to dilute agency. Boundaries become his immune system. Boundary enforcement becomes self-respect. Emotional distance becomes stamina. He's not shutting people out. He is preserving psychological functionality, so problem-solving can continue. In attachment science, this resembles the ability to self-regulate without clinging. In trauma psychology, it resembles choosing one's emotional exposure instead of being overwhelmed by it. In masculine identity, it is sovereignty. Point 6, identity reconstruction through solitude and adaptive renewal. In the final evolution of survival mode, the Sigma enters a psychological environment most men fear: solitude. Solitude is often misinterpreted as loneliness. But loneliness is the discomfort caused by unmet social needs. Solitude is the optimization that emerges when social needs dissolve. The Sigma uses solitude as reconstruction. In this phase, identity is reevaluated. Values are rewritten. Beliefs are recalibrated. Metrics of success are cleansed of social bias. He no longer chases what looks impressive. He chases what sustains resilience. His emotional architecture becomes minimalistic. His daily routines become monastic. His cognitive patterns become disciplined. His inner dialogue loses theatricality and becomes logistical. He studies himself with objectivity. He identifies flaws with neutrality. He upgrades habits without dramatization. He treats self-development like renovation, removing outdated structures, reinforcing foundational beams, and modernizing internal function. In psychological literature, this is similar to self-directed neuroplasticity, the conscious remodeling of mental circuits through new habits and repeated cognition. Identity becomes intentional rather than inherited. Masculinity becomes functional rather than performative. Confidence becomes structural rather than theatrical. Meaning becomes privately engineered rather than socially awarded. In solitude, the Sigma's nervous system learns how to operate without external dopamine. He gains emotional independence. He learns cognitive minimalism. He becomes a producer rather than a consumer. His threshold for stimulation decreases, so his tolerance for discipline increases. He does not emerge louder. He emerges quieter, sharper, more precise, and more self-governing. He survived not through domination, but through order. Not through ego, but through structure, not through theatrics, but through internal symmetry. He becomes a man whose value does not require explanation. In the end, a Sigma male in survival mode is not escaping life. He's preparing himself to meet it on steadier terms. There is no celebration in this process, no spectacle, and no need for recognition. Survival mode is gradual organization, gradual clarification, gradual strengthening. It is the quiet accumulation of internal resources until clarity replaces confusion and function replaces impulse. When he eventually steps back into the world, he does so silently. No announcement, no applause, no self-advertisement. His strength is not projected outward. It is stored inward. His value is not measured by attention. It is demonstrated through consistency. His life is guided not by pressure, but by deliberately engineered stability. For the Sigma, survival mode is not collapse. It is renewal. Not regression. It is calibration. Not panic. It is planning. It is a reset, a reconstruction, a return to structural masculinity, a reminder that stability is engineered, not inherited. When that internal work concludes, he re-enters life at his pace, in his direction, without apology, without hesitation, without dependency, and without fear.